Them All, which dovetails nicely into our conversation about what is going on in Washington and what they expect from us and what, after all, is fair and what's not fair along the tax lines.
Stephen, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
Are you in? I see you on Fox News from time to time and on Fox Business Channel. Are you in New York or Washington?
Well, right now I'm in New York, but my office is in the belly of the beast, Washington D.C.
Okay, but you go to New York to do TV a lot, I guess.
I do. In fact, I'm in New York today to do a couple of Fox shows. I'm a Fox contributor, so
Gotcha.
I do a lot with Fox. And as you know, the owner of the Wall Street Journal is Rupert Murdoch, who also owns News Corp and Fox News, so it's a good partnership.
Hey, by the way, before we get to your book, did I see a comment by Rupert Murdoch the other day warning against inflation? Do you remember that? Did you see that?
I've heard him say that before, that this is...
hyperinflation is what he was warning about.
Well, that's the worry, is that, how, the way that we are financing our debt, as you guys know, is that the Treasury Department is issuing the debt and the Federal Reserve Bank is printing money and then purchasing the debt. And that is
that sounds like incest to me.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's the Argentina and Bolivia model of economic development.
Hey, how can that? By the way, Stephen's book is called "Who's the Fairest of Them All." It's available now, isn't it, Stephen?
Oh yeah, it's out on the newsstands and on Amazon, and we've done really well with it, because the point of the book really is just to tell people, to educate people about really how much taxes are being paid by people at the top. And it's I don't know if you guys are aware of this statistic, but the richest 1% already, even before this giant tax increase we passed, they already pay 40% of the income tax.
Yeah, yes, 1% of the American public, you're saying, pays 40% of the federal income tax.
Isn't that amazing? And then the president says they're not paying enough. By the way, the top 10% pay about 70% of the income tax. So 2/3 of the income tax are paid by people in the top 10%. Top 20% pay over 95% of the income tax.
Yeah. I want to get back to that. That's some very interesting numbers, and I don't think that most Americans even know that. But and 50% of Americans probably don't even care, unfortunately, about that today, because 47% or 50% don't even pay federal income tax. Let me, without putting our listeners to sleep, Stephen, and not accusing you of having and not an entertaining message. But back to this idea about borrowing and money. I don't understand, and I haven't had anybody yet, with the exception maybe of one person, who can explain this to me where I can sort of grasp it, in terms of the debt and who's buying our debt. Okay, we hear that China and Japan and maybe some other countries have bought American Treasury bonds. That is buying the debt. Is that what that is?
That's right. We have $16 trillion of outstanding debt, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but about half of that is owned by American citizens, where we're buying our own debt when we buy Treasury bills. And then, as you just said, a lot of it, the single country that owns the most debt of our debt is China. And then you've got some of the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia that own a lot of our debt.
But how can the Federal Reserve buy? It sounds like you got a married couple and they're borrowing. They each got credit cards they're using to pay off each other's.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds weird to me. I don't know, but anyway.
Well, that's a good analogy, actually, and it is weird. It doesn't sound weird. It is weird, and it's also very dangerous, because what's happening now is that the Treasury is, let's just keep it really simple. So we have a Congress and a president that combined are spending about $1.1 trillion a year more than we're bringing in revenue. So just to equate this like a household, it's like your expenditures exceed your your income by $1.1 trillion. Now, most households would probably say, we better cut back on our expenditures. But if you read my piece in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, you might have seen that the president told John Boehner we don't have a spending problem, which was an amazing revelation from the president. That, we're spending $1 trillion more than we take in, and yet he's saying we don't have a spending problem. In any case, so then the question is, what do we do, about that? Well, obviously we issue bonds. People lend the federal government money, and what's happened this is one of the first times in peacetime, I think it is the first time in peacetime in American history, where the way we're now paying our debt is the Federal Reserve Bank, which of course has the printing process. It prints the hundreds and the 50s and the 20s and the 10s. It's printing money, and then it's basically using the money that it's printing to, I'm oversimplifying, but really this is how it works. They're using the money that they print to then purchase the bonds that the federal government is issuing. So this is what the technical term for that is, monetizing the debt. And I wasn't really joking when I said, well, that's what Mexico does. That's what Argentina does. That's what countries do when they get into a debt crisis. They print more and more money. And, of course, when you print paper money, that just means that the money that we all hold in our wallets and our bank accounts is worth less.
Well, you're listening to today's issues. Our guest is Stephen Moore, author of Who's the Fairest of Them All. Stephen, one of the things that Tim and I had touched base on a little bit earlier, there is a news story going around that Representative Gerald Nadler is behind this idea of $1 trillion coin. Now, you're talking about the monetizing of the debt, printing more money to buy up the debt. Is this possible? I mean, is this something that they could actually do? And
will the Chinese accept it?
And how idiotic is it?
It's incredibly idiotic. It was really, the idea was floated as kind of a joke, like an episode of South Park, And the frightening thing is that these politicians who are so averse to cutting spending, some of them, like Jerry Nadler, have actually picked up the idea. Now, look, the idea is you issue this $1 trillion coin, and it's just basically a way of pretending that somehow you have reduced the debt by $1 trillion, but of course none of the debt is really, it's almost like putting it in another drawer.
Yeah.
And, look, we've got to get serious about cutting spending, and the politicians will come up to amazingly creative ways of pretending that we don't have this debt to avoid having to make the cuts that we need to make as a nation so that we don't go broke.
Are they worried, Stephen, by the congressman, and the only side of the aisle I hear talking about cuts are real substantial cuts are the Republicans, and the Democrats, I don't know if they're in denial or do they think that you can just borrow and spend forever with no consequences? Or
Good question. I mean, it's hard to get into their mindset. That's why I mentioned that incident when that people can read my piece in the Wall Street Journal when I interviewed John Boehner yesterday, where President Obama told them in these negotiations that we don't have a spending problem. And so there is a kind of delusion on the left that we can continue to spend and spend and spend. In fact, not only have they not come up with spending cuts, the President, Speaker Boehner told me in the interview I did with him that there was never a time during the entire 5 weeks they negotiated where the president ever once came up with spending cuts. I mean, that's an amazing thing. He never proposed a single spending cut in 5 weeks.
I want to read for you, by the way, we're talking to Stephen Moore, who's the fairest of them all, the truth about opportunity, taxes, and wealth in America, where he points out that, let's see, 10%, I think, did you say 10% of Americans pay 70% of all the federal income taxes?
That's right, yes.
And then the top 20% pay 90%?
Between 90 and 95% is of the federal income taxes paid by the people in the top 20%. And then, as you said, about the bottom 40% pay very close to zero.
I want to read for you, Stephen, get your comment on this. This is an editorial from the Washington Post from January 2011, and they are talking about the debt problem and President Obama's State of the Union speech for that year, which is 2 years ago. And I don't know what we were at, $14 trillion. But anyway, the Washington Post, they give three possible reasons why the headline of the article is Mr. Obama has, again, remember this is 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Obama has chosen not to lead on the deficit. Is there a plan B? That's the Washington Post, which is a liberal newspaper. They would be sympathetic with Obama's economic plans, but they say, why has he chosen not to lead on the deficit? And they give three reasons why. Three possible reasons why. But the third one really struck me, and I want to get your comment on this. They say, the Washington Post, they say the third and scariest possibility, why Obama doesn't seem to care, I'm putting that phrase in there,
Yeah.
is this. The White House may have decided that debt reduction is so tough it has to wait what officials, speaking not for attribution, have termed a forcing event. A spike in interest rates, a reluctance by foreigners to buy U.S. debt, or some other market disruption that would frighten Congress into action. Continues the Washington Post. What's disturbing about this idea is that such, quote, forcing events tend to take on lives of their own. Once a panic starts, it's not easily controlled, end of quote. So, Stephen, what do you think about this idea that maybe President Obama thinks it's too hard to deal with the debt, so maybe he'll try to ride it out while he's president? Maybe the House of Cards won't collapse, and or maybe he's waiting on a forcing event that instead of trying to do something about it in the meantime.
Well, this is the bubble in our economy, right? We've lived through two bubbles. Remember, we had the high technology bubble when the stock market collapsed. That was in Bill Clinton's last year in office. And then in George Bush's last year in office, we had the housing market bubble collapse. And neither of those were very fun experiences. And, we all look at ourselves like, why didn't we do something about this before this bubble collapsed and the economy and the stock market crashed? And so now we have this third bubble. Everyone knows it. We all know the bubble is bursting, and that is going to burst at some point. And that this is the federal debt bubble. And it's almost like, I don't know if you all ever played that game. We used to play it as a kid where you'd have this ticking time bomb.
Yes.
And it was a little plastic time bomb, and you pass it around.
Yeah.
And whoever had the time bomb when it went off, you lose, and that's sort of what we're doing with our federal debt now, and that's what President Obama is doing. We're playing past the bomb, and he's hoping it won't go off while he's president and while he's got that time bomb in his hand. But, of course, it could. I don't know when the time bomb is going to go off. I don't know if it's going to be 6 months from now or 2 years from now or 5 years from now. But, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to go off, right?
Yeah.
And so this is so irresponsible to pretend like it's not ticking. This is not a fire alarm. This is a real crisis. It is a real emergency. And shame on not just the president, but for the Congress as well, both parties, for not doing something about it before it wreaks havoc on our economy.
The irony here is, and I know Republicans play politics just like Democrats do from time to time, but the irony here is that in 2006, when the debt ceiling was up for a vote to be raised or not, all 48 Democrat senators voted no to increase the debt ceiling. Even President Obama voted no.
Yes.
And President Obama said, increasing, this is $6 trillion ago.
Right.
Okay. He said, President Obama said, as a senator, when he voted against Bush, this is what he was doing. They were all voting against Bush. They didn't care about the debt ceiling. They were just being political. He said then Senator Obama, increasing America's debt weakens us domestically and internationally. Does it?
Boy, are those words going to come back and haunt him, because, there's so much hypocrisy in Washington, and these guys are now that President Obama is president, they're all saying, oh, well, we can't not raise the debt. And by the way, this was another thing that John Boehner brought up in my interview, is the president said, of course, you're going to have to raise the debt ceiling. And he turned to the president and said, well, wait a minute, Mr. President, you didn't raise the debt ceiling when George W. Bush was president. Right. Now you're saying it's a catastrophe if we don't. I mean, it's unbelievable hypocrisy with a capital H.
What do you think?